Well, hello, I'm Dr. Brian Cox, and my job on Sunshine was the scientific consultant. So hopefully I'll be able to give you an idea of what that involves and how we tried in the movie to be as close to scientifically accurate as we could, with some notable exceptions. There's always a tension, I think, and Danny Boyle said this to me as soon as when we first met. There's going to be a tension between making a movie, a $40-50 million movie that people want to watch, and getting the science right. It's not a documentary. He actually said to me at one point, if I could make a $50 million documentary with you presenting it about the sun, then I'd do that, but I'm not going to be able to get the money. So I hope I can give you some feeling of where we made compromises in order to make the film exciting and in order to make it look great, and where we tried to get the science as close as possible. Because obviously if someone says something or does something in a film that's absolutely ridiculous, then you jar the audience out of the movie. So you don't want to do that. You want to keep them locked in all the way through the film. And so it was a fascinating experience for me. I should say something actually about how I got involved. Danny Boyle and Andrew MacDonald, the producer, saw me on a BBC TV documentary about Einstein about 3 years ago now, in 2000 and I think it was 2005 actually, 2.5 years ago. And at the time they'd just got to the last draft of the script. I don't think they'd cast anyone in the film, but they knew, because Alex Garland had written it this way, that the one of the main characters in the film, or maybe even the hero in the film, as you can hear speaking now, was Kappa, the physicist, played by Cillian Murphy. And they knew that he was a young guy. He was probably about 30 years old. And also, he's got to be the best physicist in the world, or certainly the second best, because the first best would probably have been on Icarus 1, and we'll talk more about that later. So the best physicist in the world being 30 years old, that bothered them, because their impression of physicists was pretty much, I think, what most people's impression of a physicist is, which is of someone who looks like Einstein, some old guy with crazy hair and bad teeth. And obviously Cillian Murphy isn't that. So they saw me on a documentary, and I don't look old. I think I can say that. I'm in my 30s, and actually Danny has said that well, I'm not going to claim that I look like Cillian Murphy, but he said that there's a resemblance, and sometimes he says that's why he cast Cillian, and I've asked Cillian for a bit of his fee, actually, and he said no. So that's the reason they got in touch initially. There was someone there that they saw on TV that looked young enough to be Kappa, and who could get the science as right as they could. But also, I think what became more important for me and my role in the film was to work with the actors, particularly Cillian Murphy, but also the rest of the actors, to give them some sense of what it'd be like to go on a mission to the sun, and what would go through your head. I mean, you can see in this scene now, there's that's Cliff Curtis reacting to the sun, and as he gets really close to it, they're just approaching Mercury now, so it's something like 2/3 of the distance there. And obviously Cliff couldn't see that when he was acting, and so one of my jobs was to give lectures to the cast about, give them the facts. The fact, for example, you can fit 1 million Earths inside the sun. I mean, can you imagine that? The planet Earth looks big from space. It feels big now for everyone who's sat on it. You could fit 1 million of those inside the sun. It's 6,000 degrees centigrade at the surface, which is hot enough to melt any substance known, including diamond. It burns 600 million tons of fuel every second. Imagine that. 600 million tons a second. It actually loses 4 million tons of mass every second as sunshine. That's what sunshine is. So to give the actors a sense of what that would feel like as you come face to face with it was one of my first jobs. Now, one of the things that I had to face immediately was the script was written and the sun is dying. And in Sunshine, it's dying in 50 years. The film's set in 2057. That was non-negotiable. And so the first thing that Danny and Alex asked me was, well, is that possible? And my first response was, no, it isn't. I mean, the sun is dying. As I said before, 600 million tons of fuel every second. It can't last forever. It's losing an immense, unimaginable amount of fuel every second. But we think it's got enough left, because it's so big, for something like 5 billion years, which is a long time. It's certainly not 50 years. But obviously I wanted to try and think of some kind of mechanism for how that could happen. And my place of work actually is at a lab called CERN in Geneva. We built a machine there called the Large Hadron Collider. It's 27 kilometres in circumference. The immense machine recreates the conditions that were present less than a billionth of a second after the universe began. And that's full of physicists who love a challenge, like I do. So we went away and thought for quite a long time. And we did find one interesting theory about the way that stars, not actually like the sun, but neutron stars, might die in the universe. And we see actually huge explosions in the universe all the time, several every year, called gamma ray bursts, which are incredibly powerful explosions and they don't have an explanation. And I found one academic paper that suggested that some exotic objects, things called cue balls, could be drifting around in the universe. They could have been made way back at the Big Bang, so 13.7 billion years ago. And the idea is they could still be in the universe today. And this paper was addressing what had happened if one of those drifted into the heart of a star and got captured. So it sat still in the heart of a star, like a neutron star. And it appears that these things, if they existed, could be more stable than normal matter. So if you can imagine that, normal matter, the matter that we are made of and that stars are made of, could turn into this strange cue ball matter. It's actually called supersymmetric matter. And that'd call this thing to eat the star from the inside out, until in the case of a neutron star, it wasn't heavy enough to be a neutron star anymore. It'd explode into the universe, and you'd see this incredibly bright explosion, and that was a gamma ray burst. And so that's the thing that we settled with in Sunshine. We decided that, well, maybe these objects exist, and there's actually some theoretical basis for thinking that they might. They'd also be a form of matter that may be something known as dark matter, which is certainly expected to be out there in the universe, actually 5 times as much of it as there is of the stuff that makes up you and me and the stars and planets we see around us. So the idea is that one of these may have drifted into the sun, and then all you'd have to do, I say, and we can discuss why it's going to be difficult to do this later on, all you'd have to do is get some kind of bomb in there to disrupt this thing. So reigniting the sun, almost certainly you wouldn't be able to do, well, I'd say certainly you wouldn't be able to do that. If it runs out of fuel, as it will in 5 billion years, it's going to die. But maybe if something drifted in there, then maybe you could imagine trying to just remove that thing and restoring the fusion reactions in the centre of the sun to their former glory. So that's what I imagine is happening in Sunshine. Actually, you see there Cillian doing something with his hands, which I've been told by many of my friends is something that I do. So one of the things Cillian did to prepare for his role was to come and visit me at CERN in Geneva. And he spent quite a few days there, actually, just sitting, watching me and watching my friends in meetings, and talking about incredibly boring things. But one of the things that impressed me about him is he's a really dedicated actor, and he just watches. And he said to me later, one of the things he likes to do is pick up small things that will begin to allow him to build a character, so that he doesn't act like himself. He wants to take himself away and make himself a physicist. And those hand movements that you saw there are one of the things he said he did to not do an impression of me, but at least put him in the mindset of a physicist. There again, you see Hiroyuki Sanada reacting to the sun. Danny said actually that what he did for a lot of the actors, he said that when he sees actors acting to blue screen, it's very difficult for them to act at the right level. They either underact or overact because they can't see anything. So what was done was that lighting effects were used, so at least the actors were looking into something, obviously not that beautiful image of the sun, which is computer generated, but some kind of light so they could react to it. And in fact, the light in his eyes there, as far as I understand, was not computer generated. It was just a reflection of this kind of well, Danny's called it a disco at some point that they built in front of the actors so they could react to something bright.
You're thinking about Icarus One. No, whatever it was that tripped them up.
Michelle and Hiroyuki there talking about the oxygen garden. This was another piece of, I think, scientific accuracy on the ship. Absolutely clear that one of the big problems in a 3-year mission is oxygen, and plants are a beautiful way of taking carbon dioxide, which we breathe out, and turn it into oxygen. And so there was this wonderful oxygen garden on the ship. And I think that's probably the way that you would do that, the way that if you're on a long mission, a mission to Mars, manned mission to Mars, for example, which would be 3 years, I'm sure there would be plants on the ship, and maybe they would be the primary life support system.
We have an excess of manliness breaking out in the comms center.
You also see there one of the other important things that we talked about a lot in the film, psychology of long-term spaceflight. These astronauts on Icarus 2 have been there for 16 months before the film begins, cooped up inside this small space together. And there's a very famous quote, actually, from one of the Russian cosmonauts who said that if you lock 2 or 3 men up inside a small container for months on end without access to their loved ones, then you have all the conditions for murder. And you saw that there. I think Cillian's character and Kappa and Mace, Chris Evans' character, were just getting a bit frustrated with each other because Kappa had used up all the time that they had to communicate back with their loved ones on Earth. In fact, if you look at the Russians, the Soviet space program, that's where all the experience is on long-term spaceflight. One of the things that's described there is that after about 2 or 3 months, the main way of keeping people sane on the Mir space station was to allow the astronauts to have one-on-one private communication back to their families on Earth. It was considered to be the most important thing for keeping people sane. Now, what happens in Sunshine is, at this point in the film, so about 10 minutes into the film, that's 16 months into the mission, the communication with Earth has been lost because of the interference of the sun. So the radio waves can no longer get back to Earth. And that's the point at which the tension begins to build. So that's a very probably realistic reflection of what had happened. I would say, actually, that at this point in the film, we haven't reached Mercury yet. And in fact, we can communicate from Mercury. So this is one of the points, the first point in the film, perhaps, where we just bend the science a little bit just for the sake of the plot, because obviously it's a key plot point that these people are beginning to lose their minds, and it would be good if they could lose contact with Earth at this point. In fact, we've sent missions to Mercury. The first one in 1974, Mariner 9, and that spacecraft passed very close to Mercury about 3 times. So it's interesting that even in the 70s we had the technology to go to Mercury, and that spacecraft was always in contact with Earth. So it's certainly true that you would lose contact with Earth at some point on a mission to the Sun, but actually it'd probably be a little closer to the Sun than this. So we portrayed it as being a little more difficult perhaps than it is.
Quadrant, which by 1700 had turned into a minor asteroid storm. None bigger than a raindrop.
This is a very important part of the plot. Actually, Kaneda, the captain of Icarus 2, is trying to work out what could have happened to the first mission, Icarus 1, which was lost 7 years ago inexplicably, and no one knows why that happened.
It was beautiful.
See, that's so this is Captain Pinbacker, captain of Icarus 1, and you see that Kaneda's picked up on that word beautiful. Remember, he's describing he's on a mission to save the human race here. That the only thing that matters is that he delivers his bomb to the sun to well, in our backstory, disrupt this object that's drifted in and stop the sun from working. And he's got hit by a meteorite storm. So you would think that that would have been quite nerve-wracking for him, right? I mean, it's something that could threaten the mission. It didn't, as he explains. But he describes it as beautiful, which is a very loaded word. You know, when the whole human race is threatened and something like that happens, perhaps beautiful is not the word that you would use. It's a word that's often used, actually, by physicists to describe the universe and the way that nature works. It's an almost spiritual reaction, which we'll certainly talk about later in the film. But as the captain, the astronaut who's responsible for the safety, I think that triggered something in Kaneda's mind. He noticed that there's something odd going on in Pinbacker's mind, and that's what you're supposed to see, I think, in that scene.
What can one say? Ladies and gentlemen, Mercury.
I think this is one of my favourite scenes in the film, actually. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful special effects. What you're seeing there is the planet Mercury drifting across the face of the sun. I mean, you can even see the light just shining through some of the craters on the surface. Well, we visited Mercury once so far. 974, Mariner 9, passed by 3 times and took some beautiful pictures of the surface. And there's a mission on its way now, actually, as I speak, in 2007. So if you're listening to the DVD in, I think it's 2009, 2010, then you should already know that Mercury Messenger, a NASA spacecraft, should have got there. And it's an incredibly ambitious mission because it's going to go into orbit around the planet Mercury. And I'll talk a little bit about getting into orbit around Mercury and the Sun later on when Icarus 2 does it. But it's incredibly difficult to do that. You've got to lose a lot of energy. The thing about orbits is that it's the only thing that matters really is a particular orbit has a particular energy. Getting into orbit around Mercury requires you to lose about half the energy your spacecraft has when it launches from the Earth. And you do that by slingshotting around different planets. In fact, Mercury Messenger has orbited around Venus a couple of times. It's orbited around the Earth a couple of times. It's been on this incredibly tortuous route to the Sun, which is going to take something like 5 years to get there. And that's just because they want to get it into orbit around Mercury. Very difficult to do.
/B?
Yes, Harvey.
You see here, they've just picked up the distress beacon of Icarus 1.
M5.
What is it?
It's the Icarus 1. That signal is their distress beacon.
Jesus.
It's impossible. It's been 7 years.
Clearly, it's not impossible because you can hear it with your own ears.
Are you saying they're still alive?
We don't know.
I love that
Oxygen is self.
bit of acting by Troy Garrity, actually, as Harvey.
What about food?
Cillian told me that one of the things Danny said
That depends.
to the cast was that they should listen to me when somebody said something that I thought was stupid. And I'd just say no, really, absolutely, definitively. And I think that's a trait of probably not only scientists, but all academics. And Cillian told me Danny told the rest of the cast to listen to me when someone said something stupid to me and listen to the dismissive nature of my response. And I wonder whether Troy had picked that up there because he's very dismissive.
Now about the source of the Icarus 1 beacon.
Now that there is one of the few, I think, what I would call little scientific errors in the film,
No one picked up the signal.
which I missed.
In the background,
You see that Icarus there was actually in orbit around Mercury rather than slingshotting around it. And that you certainly wouldn't do. As I mentioned before, it's extremely difficult to get something into orbit around Mercury. Mercury's very, very small. A lot smaller than the Earth, just a bit bigger than the Moon, actually. And to get something into orbit around it, you have to slow down hugely. And that's exactly what you wouldn't want to do on Icarus. So you might slingshot around it, use its gravity to deviate your course a little bit. But the graphic there shows Icarus being in orbit around Mercury, and that's just a bit of a artistic license.
Do I have to spell it out for you? We have a payload to deliver to the heart of our nearest star. We're delivering that payload because that star is dying, and if it dies, we die. Everything dies. So that is our mission. There is nothing, literally, nothing more important than completing our mission. End of story.
He's right.
He's right. Of course I'm right. Is anyone here?
That's the typical Mace throughout this film. He's
No, Captain.
he made his one mistake, and I like the kind of what I take to be the graphical representation of that, where he had his long hair and he hadn't been bothered having a shave, and now he's focused and he's shaved his head and he's clean shaven and he's focused on the mission. I know that Chris spent some time talking to quite a few astronauts. I mean, he's a career astronaut, a test pilot,
The Icarus 1 that made,
absolutely focused.
as you pointed out, Mace, we have a payload to deliver. A payload, singular. Now, everything about the delivery and effectiveness of that payload is entirely theoretical. Simply put, we don't know if it's going to work.
This is a very important part of the plot.
This. If we had two bombs,
You know, it's only in 50 years' time, this, and so even then, even if we'd discovered these cue ball objects and understood them, and I should say, by the way, there's a good chance that we'll possibly discover those things at CERN, where I work, within the next few years. So again, if you're listening to this in 5 years' time, then these supersymmetric particles that make up these objects called cue balls could well have been discovered. In fact, I'm willing to have a bet with you that if you're listening to this in 10 years' time, so in 2017, then we'll have discovered supersymmetric particles at CERN. So I'll put a £10 on it. And if we haven't discovered them, then you can email me in 10 years' time.
Made by you by any chance?
Made by the person best qualified to understand the complexities of payload delivery. Our physicist.
You see, one of the things I really like about Cillian's performance is he gets you feel that he's not a career astronaut, which he isn't. I mean, he's quite young, and he's a brilliant physicist. So he will have spent most of his time doing what I do. Or if you're listening to this commentary, you know, you have jobs and you spent time working on those. That's what he's done. And now he's been thrust into this position where he's 16 months out, 60 million miles from home at this point, on his way to the sun. And the responsibility of saving the whole human race has now been put on his shoulders at that point because Icarus One's been discovered. Now, he's the only guy on that ship, probably one of the few guys in the world that understands how this bomb works. And as Searle said, the bomb is theoretical because, you know, this isn't too far in the future. We're not all powerful. This is our last chance to save the planet with this bomb, and it's fallen on his shoulders, and he's probably not the kind of person who's used to making those kind of decisions. He's not like Mace or Kaneda, career astronauts, captains and test pilots. He's just a scientist, although a very clever one.
We've mined all Earth's fissile materials for this bomb. There's not going to be another payload. The one we carry is our last chance. Our last, best hope.
It's also a great piece of writing by Alex Garland, actually. He got it absolutely right, the way that a scientist is taught to behave. Right? The worst thing you can do in science is to guess. You're taught and you're trained as a research scientist to know exactly where the edge of your knowledge stops. And then you're taught to enjoy going exploring the region that you don't know, but you shouldn't guess. You should never speak with authority if you don't really know the answer. And that's what he did there. I thought it was real insight from Alex to write that, because it didn't come from me, it came from Alex. He doesn't want to guess, but he knows that he has to, because he knows he's the person who's best qualified to make that decision. So he makes it. But he does say it's like tossing a coin. I spoke to Cliff, actually, several times about Searle's character. You can read this movie two ways, and they're both valid, the way that Searle's character develops. Cliff always thought that the reason he was looking at the sun like that, and you see later on that his skin gets worse and worse as he gets more and more sunburnt, he thought that he was trying to research, because he's a professional psychologist, he was trying to research what impact staring into the sun, that source of life, that you know, almost a representation of God, you could say, in this film, that powerful object. He wanted to research what it would do to the crew, because there was a suspicion that perhaps this is what had happened to Icarus One when the mission was launched, which is why there's a psychologist on board Icarus 2. Obviously, they didn't know what had happened to Icarus One, and you don't know when you're watching the film at this point. But he felt that his character remained professional all the way, and he wasn't becoming obsessed with the sun or mesmerised, but he was just researching into what that would do. So he was using himself as a guinea pig, which is a reading of the character that I sympathise with. There's actually some papers on the wall there in Kappa's bunk, which are papers of mine, actually, research papers. The set designers wanted to, and Cillian actually wanted to have some things with writing on and things with equations on that he could pin up that his character may have put there. And so we pinned up some papers that I'd written, which are actually published now on something called WW scattering at the LHC. So it's a speculation on what we might find when we turn the Large Hadron Collider at CERN on in 2000, well, the end of 2007, actually, beginning of 2008.
Put us on our way.
So if you want to read of some of those papers, you can you can go to the web and find them.
It changes our angle of approach to the sun by 1.1 degrees.
You didn't reset the shields to the new angle.
That's another example, actually, of the way physicists can be. I said to Danny, actually, and Alex, when I first met them, that as a physicist, if they really wanted me to kind of engage with them, they'd have to put up with a few things. And one is that I'd probably start telling Danny how to direct the film, and I'd probably start telling Alex how to write it. It's just a trait, I think, that scientists have, again, that Danny liked and asked the cast to watch. And there you see it again with Cillian, with Kappa there. He knows exactly what's gone wrong, and he says it. He doesn't really give much of a... He doesn't give a damn for the feelings of Trey, who's just possibly wiped out the entire human race by making a mistake. And he just says, "You didn't reset the shields, did you?" Just absolutely flat and unemotional. I mean, I'm not proud of that in my character, but apparently it's there.
Okay. I'll get suited up.
The backstory, Trey, actually, is very interesting. He was a mathematical prodigy. Alex wrote backstories for all the characters, and Trey's was that he was this genius who wrote a virus that took down the entire computer system of the world at some point. But the most important thing for him, for his character, is that he'd never made a mistake. You know, he's an absolute genius, the best at everything, all the way through. And so that's what gives him well, that's why he's on board, because he's a mathematical genius and he's the navigator. But also, this perhaps is what the film's about to some extent. All these people are brilliant. They've always been brilliant. And although you're trained to try and recognise your own shortcomings, if you've never done anything wrong, you'd be so confident. You perhaps wouldn't get everyone to check it. You know, you'd think, well, I'm the man who knows how to do this. I'll do the calculations, I'll check them, and it'll be right. And for the first time in his life, because he's under this pressure, you know, he's got the whole planet's fate is riding on his shoulders, he makes that one mistake, the first mistake he's ever made. What a time to make it. And I think I love Benny's acting in that, Benny Wong's acting. I think it's a really powerful scene in the film. It's probably the first time you see real emotion in the film, other than perhaps the fight that you saw between Kappa and Mace earlier.
We've done this 1,000 times in Earth orbit training.
Yeah.
You're gonna be fine.
So you might say, you know, why send a physicist out here? I mean, I know it's Mace kind of getting his own back in a way, but the captain agreed. I like to think that, you know, they don't think there's any risk here at this point. You know, they're doing something slightly unusual in that they're going to rotate the spacecraft to get some shade onto the shield, but they know what they're doing.
We don't need him now. We're gonna need him to go home.
We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. In the meantime, I'm gonna try and give him as much shadow as I can.
All right, guys. I'm opening up.
These rotating communications towers that you see there going past, that, I think, was a suggestion to show why there's gravity on the ship. I mean, obviously, I think 2001 is the only film I can think of which did artificial gravity absolutely right, because it had a rotating set. So if you have a rotating spacecraft, then you would get artificial gravity, but you'd get, as in 2001, you'd be able to stand on any surface. So you could stand upside down, you could stand on the walls. You know, you'd have a completely sort of spherical or cylindrical environment, and you could stand on any surface inside the spacecraft. That's very expensive, I think, for a film producer to build a rotating set. Perhaps only Kubrick could have got enough money to do that. So what's done in every other science fiction film I can think of? I guess the other exception is Apollo 13, where they actually filmed in zero-G on the so-called Vomit Comet, which is this plane that NASA have that allows you to simulate zero-G. But apart from that, every film, all the great films, Alien, Solaris, everything I can think of has this kind of artificial gravity. And that's kind of a nod to that, I think, the rotating bits of the spacecraft there. But I suppose, in a way, it's this film is a drama. I mean, it's a human drama. The acting is very important. And for me, if you had people upside down and floating around all over the place, then the dramatic scenes wouldn't look as dramatic because you'd be too busy watching people floating around at different angles. So I'm perfectly comfortable with the fact that gravity is a bit unreal in this, as in pretty much every other science fiction film I've ever seen. There's the ship cooling down as it moves into the shade. So you hear this huge sound.
Jesus.
That's temperature change on the shields. Metal's just contracting and expanding.
I know what it is, Flyboy.
I love that. There's Michelle Yeoh playing a scientist again, a biologist in this case.
It sounds like she's
Just re-establishing the hierarchy with the astronaut. Now you see the communications tower catches the sunlight out from behind the shield.
Fatal damage to comms towers 3 and 4.
It's a very violent environment there. I mean, we're inside the orbit of Mercury now, but we actually, incredibly, we know, as I've said, we know how to send spacecraft to Mercury. Mercury is got a very violent environment. The temperatures on the surface get to 400 degrees centigrade in the daytime. But in the nighttime, they get to about minus 150 degrees. So you've got this huge swing, about 550 or 600 degrees Celsius between the side that's facing the sun and the side that's facing away, the shade. So there, although we're very close to the sun now, probably about, I'd say 30 million miles from the sun at this point, when they're behind the shield, then they're going to be in temperatures of minus 150, minus 200 degrees. Wouldn't be completely cold because obviously that shield is very hot. So there'll be a lot of heat radiating off the back of the shield as well.
That's it. Slow down the breathing.
But inside the spacesuits, of course, they're pretty worried and it looks pretty hot in there. Actually, Cillian told me that a lot of these spacesuit scenes were filmed. It was in one of the hottest summers in London when this was filmed. And so a lot of that sweat is not makeup. It really was hot in there, apparently, in these spacesuits. But that shield, we actually know how to build a shield that could get a spacecraft to incredibly close to the sun. There's an idea to build a spacecraft called Solar Probe, which would be designed to go to within 2 million kilometers of the sun's surface. And it would have a shield, perhaps something like that. The actual design is for a cone, a big golden cone on the front of the spacecraft, which would be able to protect the spacecraft from, well, much closer than Icarus is now, actually.
Okay, mates. Test it.
You saw that communications tower, actually, as soon as it came out from behind the shield, it completely vaporized.
Yeah.
You can work out, actually, if you're a physics undergraduate and you're watching this or listening to this commentary, you can work out how close you could get with to the sun with a lump of gold. I did it, actually. I worked the other day. I decided to work it out. You can just imagine that the gold is what's called a black body, which means that it's a perfect radiator. It's quite a good approximation, actually. And I calculated that if you took a 1 square metre of gold weighing 1 kilogram and took it to the sun, when would it melt? It'd melt something like, if it was painted black, which you wouldn't do, of course, it'd melt at something like 5 or 6 million kilometres. So you just move it out from the shade into the light and it'd just melt within a second at something like 5 or 6 million kilometres. If it's shiny, then you can get a bit closer than that. And as I've said, we think we know now with the way that we can build materials now and the way we can polish them, that we could get a spacecraft to probably around 2 million kilometres from the sun, or even a bit closer. But you'd have to be very careful.
Negative, Icarus, manual control.
Negative, Cassie. Computer control. Returning vessel to original rotation.
What? Icarus, override computer to manual control.
Negative. Mission in jeopardy.
So here, Cassie had assumed manual control of the spacecraft to rotate it away from the sun to give them the shade. But this computer, Icarus, its job is, if the mission is absolutely threatened, it will take control again, and that's what it's done now. And they don't know why at this point. But what's happened is that the communications tower has reflected some of the sunlight through the window into the oxygen garden, the life support system. I mean, there's no way they could have predicted this would happen.
Get back to the airlock now.
Can't leave a prime helmets. Ship will burn up if the cell shields are not repaired.
They're gonna die. Don't. They're gonna burn up.
They are not.
Override Icarus, Cassie, pilot, emergency command 000.
Copy command 000. Second human confirmation required.
Copy. Mace.
And there you see one of those pressure situations.
Jesus Christ, Harvey!
Harvey comms officer, confirm backup 000.
And Harvey's not thinking straight, and Mace, ever the professional,
Continue procedure.
realises that saving the ship is the only thing you should do.
Back me
The
up.
captain, Kaneda, backs him up. So Kaneda's going to fix the shield, and he's going to sacrifice himself.
Take control of the ship.
Affirmative, Captain Phillips. Returning vessel to original rotation.
And again, that's a really realistic view, I think, of what an astronaut and a test pilot would do. I mean, very famously, Neil Armstrong took manual control of Apollo 11 when it was landing on the moon. He saw rocks and boulders all over the place and decided that he shouldn't allow the computer to land there, and I think flew it to within 10 seconds of the fuel running out. Incredible sort of courage and coolness under pressure. But of course, that's what these guys are trained to do.
60% chance of containment failure. 75% chance of collateral damage to life support systems.
What are we gonna do? Flood it with O2. What?
It's very interesting, actually, this balance between computer control and manual control. I mean, it's often assumed, you see a lot of science fiction films where these computers are all powerful things that can do everything, you just leave it to the computer. But interestingly, you read essays and histories of the Russian and American space programs, and one of the things the Russians have now realized is that they were initially over-reliant on automatic systems, whereas the Americans, and essentially because of weight problems initially, their rockets weren't powerful enough to launch incredibly sophisticated spacecraft. And so what they did was, instead of putting automatic backup systems in there, they let the astronauts pilot the spacecraft. In a way, the astronauts, the people, were the backup system, which is obviously a very efficient way of doing things. So you don't need to put 3 flight control computers there, because if the computer fails, your astronauts can fly it. And actually, there's a wonderful essay by one of the Russian female astronauts, Valentina Ponomareva, who was one of the initial Russian female astronauts, although she didn't fly, only one flew. And she said that the experience of the Soviet space program has been that it's impossible to create an absolutely reliable automatic system. And sooner or later, people will face the necessity to act after equipment fails. And that's the spirit of Icarus 2. That's the way it's designed. The humans are the ultimate backup. So Icarus is capable of taking the mission on, I'd like to think, just exactly as it was planned. So if nothing happened, you just let Icarus fly in automatic. But everything unusual that happens in the mission, everything that requires human intervention, and the humans will take over. And that's a real representation of the way that spaceflight is done now. It's considered to be the safest way of doing it. You see the same on an airliner, actually. You wouldn't get on an airliner with no pilots, even though you don't really need pilots unless things go wrong.
Captain, I'm at the edge of the shield. You must leave now. Captain!
87% shield from sunlight.
Final panel of closing. The shield is secure. You have to move now! Captain, it's right on!
Canada's not gonna make it. It's too far.
Help to move! Why isn't he moving? What did you see?
That's a credible reaction from Searle.
What can you see?
You know, I was there on set the day that Hiroyuki played that scene. Incredible. I'm sure if you flick over the commentary to Danny's commentary, you'll be talking about that now. I remember just standing there with all the crew, watching the monitors. You know, everybody from the set designers, the electricians, anyone who was there, absolutely transfixed as he played that moment. Incredibly powerful bit of acting. And I spoke to some of the people later, and people on film sets, I mean, I wasn't there all the time, but these guys are there all the time. They don't usually pay attention, but everybody was paying attention that day. Amazing bit of acting. And again, Searle was, you make your own mind up what he was doing there. I mean, was he doing his research? Was he being a responsible psychologist and trying to work out what it was that Canada could see, you know, gathering a bit more evidence to see whether he could work out what had happened to Icarus 1 and whether the crew of Icarus 2 were going to go the same way, go insane as they came face to face with the sun? Or was he losing his mind? It's a very strange reaction when your friend and your captain you've been with for many years is just about to die, and all you're saying to him is describe exactly what you're observing.
Thanks both to Canada and Kappa, our shields are intact, as is the payload. But the oxygen garden is totally destroyed. In addition, a large amount of O2 was burned in the fire. As it stands now, we do not have enough oxygen reserves to get us to our payload delivery point, let alone to survive the return journey.
So cancel the ticker tape parade.
We now have no choice but to rendezvous with Icarus 1.
So Harvey, as the second in command, has now become the captain. But you can see, and you've seen all the way through, actually, that he's the one who seems to be most nervous. He's the one on board who really wants to get home at all costs. Actually, in the scene where the crew were watching Mercury, if you look back at that scene, you'll see that he's not looking at Mercury, he's looking down. He's not impressed with the beauty of the scene in front of him. He just wants to get home.
There just isn't enough oxygen to get all of us there.
Are you suggesting we let Trey kill himself?
No. And in any case, Trey wouldn't be enough. We need to lose 2 more.
Three out of 7, that's a lot of short straws.
So coming up now, actually, is it's one of my favourite scenes in the film. It's a scene where Kappa is testing his bomb. Now, Kappa's worked on this bomb for many years. He's one of the experts on the bomb. And I spoke to Cillian a lot, actually, through the process of the film, about why it is that someone would choose to choose physics or choose science as a profession. You know, what is it that would make you give your life to science, I suppose, spend all your time doing it?
It's different.
And I said to him, the thing is that right at the base, that, you know, when you really get down to it, the motivation is that you find the universe beautiful. It's almost a spiritual reaction to it. And it is incredibly beautiful. The closer and closer you look, and we find this in the physics that I do, particle physics, the more elegant and the more remarkable the universe seems.
So do you.
And this is what Cillian's character, again, a beautiful bit of writing by Alex Garland, because, again, this is he'd written this kind of instinctively almost, I suppose, before we met.
When a stellar bomb is triggered, very little will happen at first. And then a spark will pop into existence. And it will hang for an instant, hovering in space. And then it will split into two. And those will split again, and again, and again. Detonation beyond all imagining. A big bang on a small scale. A new star born out of a dying one. I think it'll be beautiful. No, I'm not scared.
See, I think Cillian captured it absolutely perfectly there. Although, at the end, one of my other favourite scenes in the film we'll get to, even though he knows on an intellectual level and this kind of emotional level, it's going to be absolutely beautiful seeing this big bang on a small scale, which is what we do at my experiment at CERN. We do it over and over again, millions and millions of times a second, create these little big bangs. But he's going to get to see that. We don't get to see that in my experiment. You know, you see the computer representation of it. But he's going to get to see it, and he knows that's going to be a beautiful thing, and that's almost enough for him. He's happy to die when he's seen that, but even he's not prepared for what he actually comes face to face with at the end.
They're waiting for you.
Okay, let's go.
So Kappa there knows that they're at Icarus 1 because he decided that was the best thing to do. And they've already lost the captain because of that decision. So there's two things they want from Icarus 1, really. I think Kappa and Mace, the people who are absolutely just fixated on saving the world, just want the bomb. But Harvey certainly is interested in the oxygen garden on Icarus 1, because now that's the only way that they're going to get home. They're going to need somehow to either, I suppose, transfer to Icarus 1, if Icarus 1 is still able to function, or if not, then maybe you could imagine that they would rebuild the oxygen garden. I mean, I suppose they could stay there at that point in orbit around the sun for long enough to do something like that. So they've gone through into the airlock, and you see flashes of the Icarus 1 crew. You don't know why that is at this point. It's just, I mean, obviously it's building the tension, but it's just reminding you that for some reason that crew are no longer on board or no longer alive.
What?
80% of all dust is human skin.
I like that. I like to think Searle there was just trying to wind Harvey up. I mean, there's so much dust there. I'm sure it isn't the skin of 8 people, but I think that's Searle's sense of humour.
We should split up. I'm not sure that's such a good idea.
Yeah, you're probably right. Might get picked off one at a time by aliens.
Or just one's a big
You can. They're winding Harvey up.
Sure. Mace, you head for the flight deck. See if you can get her to fly. Sir, I'll check the social area.
So you see there, it's important actually for later on in the plot. You see that they have no reason to believe that there's anything strange or threatening going on Icarus One. They're not in spacesuits. They're confident that Icarus One is still intact. They don't know what happened to the crew, but you know they certainly didn't get picked off one at a time by aliens. So they just leave the airlock open, and that's important. No reason not to. So Cap has gone straight to Icarus One's bomb.
Listen up, everybody. You gotta see this. 7 years of unchecked growth. Can you see this? It's an ecosystem working beautifully. I love you, Corey. You see this? We got O2, everybody.
It's wonderful.
So at this point, they must have got into orbit around the sun. Icarus One's in orbit around the sun, locked in orbit. That's the difficult bit, actually. From a physics point of view, from an engineering point of view, and a fuel point of view, getting a spacecraft of that mass. You know, it was said right at the start that the bomb is the mass of Manhattan Island. Hugely, hugely heavy spacecraft. To get that into orbit around the sun is extremely difficult. And that's probably why they've been in transit for 16 months, because it's a very strange orbit you've got to get into. In order to get into orbit around Mercury, around the sun, you've often got to go out as far as Jupiter. Bizarrely enough, you've got to change your orbit so much that you need a planet as heavy as Jupiter to be able to swing around to get yourself into the kind of orbit you'd need to be in to orbit the sun. So we can actually get to the sun very, very quickly. The Mariner spacecraft got there in 146 days. That's all, and that was in 1974. But the reason it got to Mercury in 146 days was because it didn't have to get into orbit. So Icarus may well have gone outwards, away from the sun, towards Jupiter and slingshotted around Jupiter to get into a position where it could get into this orbit close to the solar surface.
Dreams are foolish. In the face of this, we are dust, nothing more. And to this dust, we will return.
You know what? He's actually right there, Pinbacker. He's we are dust, stardust.
It is not our place to change God.
See, that's the only point I'd disagree with him at the end. The universe began 13.7 billion years ago, as we understand it at the moment, and all that was there in the universe at the time was hydrogen and helium, nothing else. So the stuff you put in party balloons and hydrogen, which you can power your cars on now if you're environmentally friendly, that's it. So you look at your hand in front of you and there's all sorts of things. There's carbon, of course, oxygen. It's red because there's iron in your blood. All those elements, all those atomic nuclei were not present at the start of the universe. The only place you can make those is deep in the heart of stars. So they're cooked in the heart of stars, ancient stars, 5-10 billion years ago. Then the stars run out of fuel, they expand, they explode as supernova and return those heavy elements into space, into the universe. And those dust clouds then recollapse into a new generation of stars and planets like the Earth. And that's where that stuff comes from. So you look at your hand in front of you, all the stuff in there apart from the hydrogen was cooked inside the heart of stars, which then had to die in order for you to live, right? In order for that stuff to get into your body. So, you know, if I'd have been in orbit around the sun thinking about those things for 7 years, like Pinbacker, I might have come to the same conclusion. I mean, in a way, he's got a point. We're all dust. We're all stardust.
Something to say.
And actually, we're all doomed in a very real sense. In fact, I remember talking to Alex Garland about this early on, and he told me that what really motivated him to write this script, to write the film Sunshine, was that he'd read that it had been we've discovered recently the universe is going to expand forever. And not only is it going to expand forever, but it's accelerating in its expansion. It's very difficult to understand. Because if you think of the Big Bang as being this big explosion that threw everything out into space, the universe is expanding, and then gravity, the force of gravity is acting on everything in the universe, trying to pull everything back together again, because that's what gravity does. And so the universe, at least, if there's enough stuff in it, should be slowing down in its expansion. But it turns out that it's actually accelerating. There's a strange force in the universe, which we give a name, we call it dark energy. And apart from that, we have no idea what it is. But that seems to be forcing the universe, forcing the galaxies apart from each other at an ever-increasing rate. And that means, absolutely fundamentally, that no life can exist forever in the universe. At some point in the distant future, there'll be no stars, there'll be no planets, there'll be no people, there'll be absolutely nothing apart from radiation. Light, nothing else in the universe. It's called the heat death. And the Victorians actually knew 100 years ago that this was the inevitable consequence of the laws of physics as we understand them at the moment. And Alex read this and wondered what that would do, that realization would do to the human psyche. Actually, as far as he told me, did quite a lot to his psyche. It upsets him to this day, whereas I to be absolutely honest, it doesn't worry me in the slightest. But that was the trigger for writing this film, and I think Pinbacker's the embodiment of that kind of existential angst. You know, given that we now understand that the universe is absolutely pointless, how are we supposed to live? Now, to lighten it up a bit, I think, and again, it's something Alex said to me, I think that what you have to recognise is that in this meaningless universe, it is fundamentally meaningless in this sense, as far as we understand it scientifically. There are still sparks of meaning in it, and the sparks of meaning are people. So the incredible thing about the universe is that beings like us evolved. And even though we're here for a small amount of time, probably a tiny amount of time, we're still important enough to try to save. But Pinbacker disagrees.
Captain, hold it together.
Harvey, Cat was the only person outside of Icarus who can operate the payload.
There's another example of this mission design. The fact that the humans are the backup system. So the way this mission works is that if everything goes to plan, then Icarus, the computer, will operate the bomb and will fire that into the sun. But the backup, and the ultimate backup, is that Kappa's there. And if everything else fails, then Kappa knows how to detonate the bomb manually, and that's why they need to protect him and save him. But of course, no one thought this would happen. No one thought it would come to this.
Cassie!
Go.
All right, listen. We can't depressurize when we open the airlock for Kappa, so the force of the expelled gas is gonna fire him out, right?
Right.
All right, if you open your airlock and we line it up just right, he'll fire inside.
And so will we.
Without suits.
Get as close as you can.
You'll have 20 meters to cover.
At minus 273 degrees Celsius.
It's gonna be cold.
So there's one of the slight errors in the script that I missed. At minus 273 degrees. That's absolute zero, which is the coldest anything can get. Temperature's a measure, actually, of the energy of molecules or the energy of atoms moving around. if you completely stop them, you take all the energy away as much as you can, then you're at minus 273 degrees. The universe is actually 3 degrees above that absolute zero. That's called the cosmic microwave background radiation. And it was the big discovery that I think finally convinced people that the Big Bang theory, the fact that the universe began in this immensely hot fireball 13.7 billion years ago, was true. What that 3 degrees is the echo of the Big Bang. It's the temperature of the Big Bang. As the universe has expanded, it's cooled, but there's a bit left. It's not completely gone away, and it's at 3 degrees. So what she should have said is minus 270 degrees, because that's the temperature of empty space. And it's very, very important that that 3 degrees is there. But then again, she's a biologist. So maybe it's a very clever piece of scripting. Kappa would have said at minus 270 degrees. You know, this is one of what you're going to see here is you're going to see unprotected astronauts thrown out into the vacuum of space. And this is one of the things that's always argued about and almost always done wrong in science fiction. Actually, you can live unprotected in space, almost certainly for 10, 20, even 30 seconds. You certainly don't explode, which is a common myth. The pressure difference is 1 atmosphere, okay? It's not that great, the pressure difference between inside your body and the vacuum of space, and your body's strong enough to resist that. So you don't just pop or explode, as many people think. And in fact, NASA have inadvertently done this experiment to a couple of people, one in a high-altitude balloon flight and one in a vacuum chamber on the Earth. And both of those astronauts survived without too much damage. So there we go. Essentially, the trick would be to breathe out very slowly, so not hold your breath, which is what May's told them to do. That's absolutely what you would need to do. And you're out there for about 10 or 15 seconds. So as long as you get in and get some air, the thing that will kill you is that you will suffocate. You will die because of lack of oxygen. Certainly not because of a low temperature, and certainly not because of the low pressure. Although it's true that the moisture, if you stick your tongue out, then the moisture on your tongue would boil away.
Crew detected in airlock. Recommend sealing outer airlock door.
I lost Harvey! Harvey's gone!
Crew detected in airlock. Sealing outer airlock door.
So there Icarus has been told to seal the airlock door as soon as the crew got inside. And then I suppose at the same time as the pressure is equalised inside the airlock, the artificial gravity turns on. And they crash to the floor. So there now you see that Harvey's frozen. You would, of course, freeze eventually. But the only way you can lose heat in a vacuum is by radiating it away. And again, if there's any physics undergraduates watching, you can use Stefan's law, sigma T to the 4, to work out how fast you would radiate at a particular temperature. And it's a long time. Just think of a vacuum flask with your coffee in it. You know, that stays warm because there's a vacuum there, and the heat doesn't get transmitted across the vacuum very easily. It's only by radiative heat loss that you can lose energy, lose temperature. And so it stays hot. Your coffee stays hot in a flask for a long time, and it's exactly the same principle. So Harvey would have frozen eventually, but actually a lot longer than that. But that's another beautiful scene in the film where his arm gets smashed off as he hits part of Icarus. So again, that's a bit of artistic license. You can forgive that for the spectacular scene, I think. And then, of course, he drifts out from behind the shield and gets immediately vaporized. Because these two spacecraft are now very close to the sun.
Sarl? We're leaving now.
So Searle, I think, now is Well, he knows now that his experiments are over. So whatever reason he was fascinated by, whatever reason he had for being fascinated by the sun initially, now he's decided that the best way for him to die is to experience what Kaneda experienced, bathe in the sunlight for one last time. Again, this observation portal, which I suppose turned out to be almost the undoing of these missions, because if it hadn't been for the observation room, I don't think these people would have gone quite as insane as they went. These observation windows seem to be possible to build. The solar probe mission that I mentioned earlier, this NASA idea to send a probe to the sun, that is designed to have some kind of periscope, some kind of way of looking at the sun, even from 2 or 3 million kilometers away. So we have the technology now to build something like that.
Which means the airlock was decoupled manually.
Cassie and I were on the flight deck the whole time.
And I was with Cap and Searle, and I think we can all assume...
So here there was obviously some kind of manual decoupling of the two ships. And you find out, I'm sure you've watched the film by the time you listen to this commentary, so you find out that was the captain of Icarus I, Pinbacker, that did that. Obviously, he crossed between the two ships because the airlock was open. Why would they close it? You saw that they left the airlock door open when they were first investigating Icarus I, and there'd be no reason for this crew to be suspicious. They didn't know they were in a science fiction film. And Pinbacker got across between the two ships, and then I imagine he'd have to initiate some kind of emergency separation procedure, some kind of explosive bolts, which you could imagine would be on there. But to do that, then surely he would have had to close the airlock doors. There must be some... If I was designing Icarus, I wouldn't allow someone to blow explosive bolts without closing the door, so that you can imagine some interlock mechanism that stopped you doing that. So he sneaked across, closed the doors, blew the explosive bolts. But of course the crew don't know that yet. They have no reason to suspect that.
Unanimous decision required. So, you know where I stand.
And Mace, again, absolutely logical. The only person he thinks could have done it is Trey.
And me.
What are you asking? That we weigh the life of one against the future of mankind? Kill him.
Cassie.
I like that bit of acting from Cillian there again. He knows exactly what to do, but you can see he's uncomfortable with it. But he knows the logical choice.
Cassie.
I know the argument. I know the logic. You're saying you need my vote. I'm saying you can't have it.
And I think that's wonderful as well. Wonderful bit of writing and wonderful bit of acting from Rose. So you remember, I mean, she's emotional, but she's the best spaceship pilot that we could find on Earth. She's an astronaut, and she says that. She says, I know exactly what the logic is. And she doesn't say don't kill him. She just says that I'm not going to endorse it. She's kind of passed the buck.
We make it easy for him. Somehow. Find a kindness.
You saw Trey watching in the background. I don't know if you picked it up. It's a very, very short scene, but it's there. So he knew that the mission was in really serious jeopardy, and he heard them talking about this problem, about the oxygen. And what you see here is that he's decided to take the decision away, I think, from the rest of the crew. And he's finally committed suicide. Now this is interesting. It initially in the script, and I spoke to Cillian about this scene, and Benny. They thought that maybe Pinbacker had killed Trey. actually, when I watched it with Benny, actually, in a screening room, Benny Wong, he plays Trey, and he changed his mind. And this just shows you how films can develop. And he now thinks that he committed suicide. And he certainly looks like he committed suicide. And actually, my own view is that Pinbacker wouldn't have killed him like that because, he didn't know that he was a suicide risk. And Pinbacker's, as you see in a minute, is far from rational. I don't think he was thinking straight. So I think that's just too devious for Pinbacker. And I think, as Mace said, that he took responsibility. And his character just decided to save the mission in the only way that he could now. The last contribution he could make.
Belongs here.
It's great. Corazon and Cassie just like, not again. These two.
Eslo, we need to limit our exertions.
There you see these solar flares, the corona, the atmosphere of the sun. Incredibly powerful things. They can erupt from the surface of the sun with the energy of thousands and thousands of atomic bombs, and they can fling huge amounts of material out into space, which can hit the Earth within 20 or 30 or minutes or so. You see the light from them, of course, in 8 minutes, but the particles themselves can come and smash into the Earth 20 or 30 minutes later. And they can cause huge damage. They can damage satellites, and in fact, we watch for solar flares now, and we turn communication satellites and delicate satellites off when huge solar flares erupt, because those particles can actually destroy satellites if they're turned on. And they can also cause power outages. There's a very famous power outage in the 80s in Canada. It tends to be at northern and southern, big northern latitudes, so around the poles, that these things can happen. But those particles can cause such disruption to the Earth's magnetic field that they can cause big electric currents to flow in power distribution grids and cause power cuts across whole states. It was in Quebec, I think, in Canada, that happened. So those solar flares that you see, those prominences there, can be incredibly powerful. They can be powerful enough, in fact, to kill astronauts or seriously injure astronauts. It's a very famous example. I think it was between Apollo 16 and 17, between the missions, when there was a big solar storm, which nobody saw coming, of course, and the astronauts, had they been out on the lunar surface, would have been exposed to very large amounts of radiation, probably not enough to kill them, but certainly to cause them pretty severe radiation sickness. I know that NASA said that even if they'd been inside the spacecraft, they'd have got a headache from the radiation dose, but it had been much worse if they'd been out on the lunar surface at the time, and it was just absolute luck that they avoided that. So even at the position of the Earth, not where Icarus is now, but at the position of the Earth, these solar storms can have a massive impact. Okay, it's quite incredible, 93 million miles away, and yet that kind of impact can be caused.
Are you an angel? Has the time come? I've been waiting so long.
Captain Pinbacker, after toasting himself on Icarus 1 in the observation room for 7 years. You see, he's absolutely deranged.
At the end of time, a moment will come when just one man remains. Then the moment will pass. Man will be gone. There will be nothing to show that we were ever here but stardust.
See, again, he's absolutely right. That's a beautiful piece of writing.
A
alone with God.
And again, apart from that bit, where I disagree with him. And there, Kappa realizes that it's Pinbacker. Pinbacker decoupled the airlock.
My God, Pinbacker. Not your God. Mine.
So a wonderfully interesting concept, I think. I know that it was one of the initial concepts that Alex came up with, motivated him to write the film, this idea of how you would deal with this pointlessness and this the inevitability of our own destruction, not only our own death, but the complete obliteration of our species and everything that we've built and everything that we've discovered, that everything, it is going to go, and that's the way that modern physics portrays the universe. And so Pinbacker has come up with this idea, I think, of giving his own life some sort of meaning. How could he do it? He's been thinking about this for 7 years, and he's decided that maybe being the last man to kind of hand over to God gives him some kind of comfort. It's a very interesting idea, and it's open to interpretation. I know I chatted with Alex at some length about it. I found it an absolutely fascinating idea. I still do. And it's just there now in the film, in those few lines that Pinbacker utters. I think the interesting thing about Pinbacker, this balance that Mark Strong, I suppose, had to find in playing the character, was that he's obviously insane, and he babbles away, and he really doesn't know what's happening at some level. I mean, he's in the observation lounge, and he turns round and he says to Kappa, "Are you an angel?" He doesn't know what's going on, but he still was the captain of Icarus One. So deep down, he knows exactly how to work this spacecraft. He knows that he's got Kappa in the airlock. He can manually lock it. He knows how to do that, and of course he'd know how to do everything because he was the captain. Maybe that jolts him into some reality again. He realizes that his plan to finish off the human race now, to hand the human race back to God, is being threatened by these guys on Icarus 2, and so he's gone and he's sabotaged the mainframe computer.
Kidding.
And all that the computer knew there was that something had gone wrong. It didn't know who it was. There was no communications device being worn by Pinbacker, and this computer is not all-seeing. There's a tendency, I think, in science fiction to think these computers are omniscient and omnipotent, almost godlike, in that they know exactly what's going on the spaceship, and they can always alert everybody to anything that's strange. But of course, computers aren't like that. Your computer in your car doesn't monitor for intruders all the time, and your laptop doesn't know when somebody else is using it other than you. And it's only 50 years in the future.
Don't fight. Don't fight.
Mate!
Here you see the computer shutting down. It's been taken out of the coolant, and the lights go out on the spacecraft. I think one of the things I've taken away from this experience of working on a film, it's the first one that I've worked on, is the attention to detail And obviously, I suppose I knew that these films can take many years to put together. But in the final film, there's only, 1 hour 40, a couple of hours of footage gets onto the screen. And every bit of it's been thought about and it's been discussed. And I was involved in a lot of the discussion over various scenes. Not over all of them, of course. But the attention to detail is quite incredible. I'd recommend it, actually. If you ever get called up by Danny Boyle and he says, do you want to work on my film? I would recommend it. One of the things, actually, that I've said to people is that I felt that it was almost like free psychoanalysis for me. Because, particularly Cillian, who had to play the physicist, but also Danny and Alex and the other members of the cast constantly asked me about my motivation for being a physicist, how I would react in particular situations. Also, now as we get to this point in the film, about my feelings about religion, about God, about how the universe began and why it's the way it is and what's our place in the universe. All these issues that are being raised in Sunshine. Of course, they wanted to know what I wouldn't say a typical scientist, because there's probably no such thing, but what this particular scientist, me, thought about these big issues, which made me think about them perhaps more than I've thought about them before. So it's a very interesting experience to go through for years, thinking about what this bit of the film actually means.
Christ. The mainframe is out of the coolant!
Because up to this point, the film has really been it's been as scientifically accurate as it could be made, with those caveats that I've mentioned and the odd tiny little mistake, but pretty much it's a film about the psychology of spaceflight. It's a film about the difficulty of going to the sun. But of course, all the way through as well, you've got this psychological reaction to the sun, this almost godlike presence in the film, the source of life on Earth. But now, the film starts to address much bigger questions, which I suppose is common again to many science fiction films. The thing that space does to you certainly does to me. It's one of the reasons that I wanted to be a physicist and an astronomer from a very young age. It gives you perspective. There's a beautiful picture, actually, taken by Voyager 2, which was one of the 2 spacecraft that went out to Saturn and Jupiter, Neptune and Uranus it began its journey in the 70s, actually, and Voyager 2 got to Neptune and Uranus in the 90s. There's a picture of the Earth and the Moon just hanging in space, beautiful crescents. If you go on the internet, I'm sure you can find it. It's a beautiful picture, and it just shows you how absolutely fragile we are. And when you read a lot of the writings of the Apollo astronauts, you find that this is one thing that crops up again and again and again. And when you look back at the whole Earth, that sense of perspective, it really is very affecting. And I like to think that these guys, these astronauts who've been looking at the Earth receding away until it's just a speck in the sky for 16 months, would certainly have begun to ask these questions, these profound questions, which are dealt with now in this part of the film.
Yeah.
And what that perspective has done to Pinbacker is, I think, beautifully illustrated by that scene. He's obviously not a complete maniac. There's some humanity left in him. There's method to his madness. He's noticed that little shoot rising up from the destruction of the oxygen garden, and he's put Corazon into that kind of meditative, almost Buddhist pose, and gave her the shoot, and he whispered in her ear, "Don't fight it," when he killed her. So you see there that he's not just a complete nihilist. He's been thinking for 7 years. that space has warped him and changed him and gave him this bizarre perspective. But as I said earlier, I think most of what he says is actually correct. The existence of the human race is, in a very deep sense, completely pointless. So he's extracting the last bits of meaning, maybe, from his existence here in what he does, the way that he kills the crew, and the way that he's decided that the human race would be better off returning to its creator now, rather than in a few billion years' time. I think this is a great scene, actually, another great bit of writing. The Kappa, as a physicist, has been given this challenge, or he's been given a problem, which is actually one of the things we all like as scientists. He's locked in the airlock. He's got a few things in there. You find that he's got a spacesuit, and luckily he's got a torch, a blowtorch. I suppose there would be tools inside an airlock so that he could deal with emergency situations. And he's got to look round and he's got to find some way of getting out of that airlock. And he knows now that he has the backup system, the thing that if Icarus, the mainframe computer, goes down, he's the only system left that can still detonate the bomb. And he's obviously realised that now as Mace fails to get the computer back into the coolant, so the mainframe is gone. So the only chance for the world, for humanity now, is for Kappa to work out a way of getting out of a locked airlock, getting to the bomb, separating it from Icarus, and then detonating it.
Do it.
Nice.
So what he's doing here, he's realised that if he drills a hole in the locked airlock door and then blows the outer airlock door, then obviously the airlock will depressurise really quickly. And all the air in Icarus too will be sucked out of that little hole. And that's going to put immense pressure on that door. And what he's hoping, of course, is that it'll put so much pressure on the door that it'll blow the door off its hinges and allow him access back into the rest of the ship again. Which is a good bit of thinking. Now you could imagine at this point thinking, what happens if Kappa fails? I mean, this is a big ask now. He's got to get to that bomb and he's got to detonate it. And as we said earlier on in the film, they don't even know whether this bomb will work. It's completely theoretical. It's at the edge of our technology. It may have no effect. Now, what happens if the sun dies because it runs out of fuel is, paradoxically, the Earth will get very hot. What had happened to the sun is it would begin not burning hydrogen into helium, which is what it does at the moment, but it'd start building those heavier elements, the elements that are essential for life, carbon, oxygen, all the way up to iron. And when it does that, the core of a star gets very hot and the star expands. And in fact, we know that in 5 billion years, when the sun runs out of fuel, it'll expand to engulf the Earth. So the sun will become bigger than the size of the Earth's orbit and the Earth will cease to exist. But in sunshine, as we imagine that something's drifted into the heart of the star. And what this bomb is supposed to do is remove that thing from the heart of the star. And again, this is where scientifically we're beginning to stretch our understanding now. This is now becoming a science fiction film. Of course, diving into the sun is extremely difficult to do. We don't really know how to do that at the moment. Maybe we never will. But also, remarkably, if you turn the core of the sun off completely, then it's very likely that we wouldn't notice for quite a long time. It takes the average particle of light, the average photon, something like 100,000 years to make its way from the core to the surface. So in that sense, even if you were successful and you reignited the core, or at least you removed this thing from the core and allowed the fusion reactions to start again uninhibited, then it may be that you wouldn't notice for many thousands of years. But of course, that wouldn't make for a good film. Or maybe it would. Maybe the film could have ended and we wouldn't have known what happened. But as you see, in a moment, you do get that brief moment of light at the end of the film. Now, whether that would actually happen or whether it would take many, many tens of thousands of years to notice, I don't know, to be honest. This is a fantastic bit of the film, actually. Kappa falls over at the most inopportune moment. Remember that if he doesn't make it back to that bomb, and he's separated Icarus from the bomb now, and he's got to go and manually activate the bomb. And remember, he's got 4 minutes. That was explained earlier in the film. In this manual separation procedure, the Icarus, the mothership, the living quarters, has got 4 minutes to get out of the way, to kind of move into a different orbit before the bomb dives into the sun. And you see that small heat shield on the front of the living quarters, which was meant to protect them on the way back, on the journey back to Earth again. So he's done everything right up to the point where he fell over because, this spacesuit is not meant for walking around inside a spaceship. It's a heavily protected spacesuit that's meant to be to protect them to some extent from the sun when they're not too close and allow them to work outside. So walking around is not what it's designed for. But he got up just in time. And now he's made it to the airlock, which opens the way into the bomb. And what you find is that what you saw earlier in the film, that Cassie ran into the bomb. Maybe she was thinking that she would try and operate it, that she would try and detonate it. Maybe she had some kind of basic training in how she could operate the bomb. Maybe she was another backup. And she would have known, obviously, that at that point, with Icarus down and the lights off, the only chance to save the world would be to get into the bomb and detonate it herself. So she ran into the bomb, she closed the airlocks behind her, and unfortunately, as you find there, Pinbacker had the same idea, so Pinbacker was in there waiting for her. So there you see, on the left of the screen, the small heat shield, the heat shield around the living quarters, which would protect them on the way home. And then on the right of the screen, you see the door into the bomb. And he makes it with 2 seconds to spare. So there you see Icarus 2 turning away, and there's a beautiful shot in a moment where, for the only time in the film, you see a picture of Icarus on the shield there. Absolutely beautiful. You might wonder why the spacecraft was called Icarus, actually. It might sound, if you know a bit about the myth, to be a bit of a silly thing to call it. But actually, if you think about the Icarus myth, it's about Daedalus, Icarus's father, building him some wings to escape from Crete. And he tells Icarus exactly how to use them. He says, look, these wings will get you out of Crete, they will do the job, but if you fly too close to the sun, then the wax and the wings will melt and you will die. So you could read the Icarus myth as being a comment on science and hubris and the way that humans use technology. What science does is it delivers this technology to you. It doesn't give you the wisdom to use it properly. But if Icarus had listened to his father, had listened to the scientists, then the wings would have done the job. So in a way, I think that Icarus is a great thing to call the spaceship, because it reminds the crew that they really should do the job and not get too carried away and not get too hypnotized by the power of nature, the sun in both cases, in the myth and the film. And of course, what happens in Sunshine and what happens in Icarus is that the crew, the humans, get rather carried away with the beauty of nature and, in my opinion, don't listen enough to the scientists. And that's what causes the problem. Although you could argue that listening to Kappa and Kappa's decision was the thing that caused the problem in the first place.
For 7 years, I spoke with God. He told me to take us all to heaven.
You could interpret Pinbacker's words as being a reference to the sun there. You could think that he was speaking to the sun and the sun was his God. Or you could interpret it as God himself. Any God. Now, the original idea of this bomb was that it was more massive than Manhattan. It was actually, in the initial script, it was the mass of the moon. And it was one of the things that I questioned. I said, look, if you're going to take something as heavy as the moon to the sun, or as massive as the moon, then imagine the rockets you'd have to stick on the back of it. It's almost impossible. And so the bomb's mass was scaled down. But this scene, where this huge cube, this huge bomb, it seems to have its own gravity, you can roll around the bomb, that carried on, that persisted, just because it's a beautiful piece of cinema. The initial idea was it would have the gravity of the moon because it had the mass of the moon, so it would have its own gravity. And that's probably why Pinbacker can pick Kappa up, actually, because this bomb has probably got 1/6 of the gravity of the Earth. And so you can pick things up that are 6 times more massive. This entry into the sun, actually, looks absolutely impossible. And of course, at some point, you can't dive into the sun. But the temperatures we can deal with in spacecraft, as you see there, ploughing through the corona and towards the surface of the sun. The temperature is extremely high. The surface temperature of the sun's about 6,000 degrees. And the spacecraft that we build now re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and deal with temperatures way, way in excess of that. The fastest re-entry actually was a sample return mission called Stardust, which re-entered the Earth's atmosphere at 29,000 miles an hour. And the Apollo missions re-entered the atmosphere at pretty much that speed, a little bit slower than that. And the temperatures there are tens of thousands of degrees on the surface of the surface of the heat shield. So actually hotter than the surface of the sun, and we know how to do that. So I imagine that this bomb has got some kind of sacrificial heat shield on it, which is something we know how to build now. We've been building those since Apollo and before, which can deal with those temperatures. And there it is, burning away as it plummets into the sun. This is an absolutely beautiful scene, in my opinion. I mean, nothing like this came across in the script. And when I first saw the film completed, I thought this was one of the best, honestly, one of the best scenes I've seen in cinema. I mean, it's not, I'm just saying that because I wasn't involved in making this scene. I think it's beautiful. The idea is that it happens in a billionth of a second. So it's a tiny, tiny amount of time, but perhaps because of the way space and time are distorted as he plummets into the sun, or perhaps just in his mind, he gets the time to see what he spoke to Cassie about earlier on in the film. And we discuss this scene at huge length. And in fact, even to this day, I think myself, Danny, Alex, Cillian, I have different views about what he's seeing there as he raises his hand to the surface of the sun. But there, for me, what that represents is the power on the right, the Big Bang, the bomb, the power of human ingenuity. You know, this kind of hubris, this confidence. We can affect something as big as a star. And then on the left of the film, there's the power of nature, that thing that had driven Pinbacker and perhaps driven Searle to the edge of insanity. Made them think that we're so insignificant that there's no point in saving us. And in the middle, stood in the middle there's a physicist who represents perhaps all human endeavour, or perhaps the power of science, the bridge between the power of nature and the power of the human mind. I think it's a beautiful scene. But I know that Danny certainly interprets it that Kappa is seeing something more than just nature there. Perhaps he's seeing something more godlike there. Perhaps he's having this sort of transcendent moment. I think that he's been brought face to face with the beauty of nature, which is why he's a physicist. So perhaps for the first time he's really understood what it was that made him study nature all his life. But there's many ways of interpreting that scene. And there we find that he was successful. His bomb worked. So I think I've actually watched the film now with a few of my colleagues, a few physicists, and they all found the particularly the last scene, but the underlying kind of message of the film, from my perspective, has been very powerful. I think that certainly if you're someone that spends your time trying to understand the way that nature works and you're familiar with the power of nature, then you see it represented in a cinema, probably for the first time actually. Fantastic bit of imagery. Now I actually honestly don't know whether that's what Danny meant to do and what Alex meant to write, but for me that's what came out at the end of the film, and for me makes it a very powerful moment, a very powerful ending. Great music as well from Manchester. People have said about Danny, actually, he seems to hire people from Manchester above all else. I'm from Manchester, and so is Danny, and so is Benny Wong, actually. So thanks for listening. I hope I gave you some insight into what it is that a scientific consultant does on a film, and maybe some more insight into the thoughts of, at least some of the thoughts that the filmmakers had in making Sunshine. One thing I want to say, it's a film that is open to interpretation, and I have a particular interpretation, and that certainly isn't the same interpretation that Danny has and many of the people that worked on the film. I think that's part of the film's appeal to me, certainly. So everything that I've said in here is my opinion, and if you have a different opinion, that doesn't mean it's wrong. I think that's one of the great things about this movie. Certainly at the end, you can read into it what you will, and there's a lot there. There are a lot of opinions there. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy watching the movie again.